a good day to you wherever you are. Thank you for joining the Doing Good Work in Africa webinar. My name is Emiola Abbas, and I'll be your moderator today. Before we begin, I just want to let everyone know that this webinar is being recorded, and as the attendees come in, your mics will be placed on mute. During the Q&A session, we encourage you to please post your questions on the Q&A using the Q&A function of the Zoom webinar. And also, please note some of the questions. If you have a similar question, just vote for the same question so that we'll be able to prioritize the ones that have received a lot of attention from our attendees. So before we begin, I just want to quickly run through our agenda for today. Today, we will start with a very definition, if you like, about what sustainable energy means. And then we will introduce our panelists. Then we'll move on to our discussion session with the panelists. After that, we will do a Q&A with our attendees. So the attendees will be allowed to ask their questions at this point in time. And then you'll hear briefly about DOWA after that. And then we'll wrap up with our closing remarks. Thank you for your responses on the poll. So we're happy that you all want to hear different things about sustainable energy. And it's good that you've joined us today. So for today's webinar, the topic is sustainable energy in Africa, where we are now and where we should be. And just in trying to do that, just to talk about the definition of sustainable energy, we have a video that we want to play for you, which is based on the comments we received from people before the webinar started. So we'll just play that video now for about a minute, and then I'll continue. Thank you.
Sustainable energy to me is energy that is renewable and cannot easily be depleted.
Sustainable energy is energy that is mainly derived from natural sources. It is pure and easily replenishable. It also contributes little to zero pollution to its environment because of its natural sources.
Sustainable energy is the efficient use of energy sources without a negative consequence or impact on people and the planet.
Sustainable energy for me is about putting the collective good above the profit of a few companies. It's about acknowledging the fact that we need the planet a lot more than the planet needs us.
Sustainable energy means preserving our resources for the future. It means finding ways to do more with less, and using our natural resources in a way that is kinder to the earth for the sake of the future.
Sustainable energy should be one of the highest priorities for the human race because it's an excellent alternative for the present that doesn't negatively impact the future.
So you heard people talk about resources, talked about depletion, renewable energy. They also talked about, profit and impacts on the environment. So when we talk about sustainable energy, I think the thing to bear in mind is that what we're trying to achieve is energy that is available for all, and energy that we're providing, we're getting from resources that cannot be easily depleted, that are not depletable. And more importantly, we are able to get that energy without compromising the ability of the future generation to also get their own energy and get other resources that they may need. So before we begin, I just want to set the scene with some numbers for Africa. I know that when people think of energy, sustainable energy, everyone thinks of electricity almost immediately. But also I want people to remember that that also covers cooking energy. What sort of energy are people using to cook? So with that, I'll say that if you don't know, coal is the most common source of energy on the continent, and that's energy used whether it's for generating electricity or heating or cooking. And the International Energy Agency in their 2019 report on Africa said that 600 million people in Africa lack access to electricity. They've also said that 900 million people in Africa lack access to clean cooking energy. And if you put those numbers in mind and you think that the Sustainable Development Goals are were developed with the intention that by 2030, we would have, one of the goals as SDG 7 is that we will have sustainable energy for all by 2030. So think of those numbers and think of how for our 2030 is. It's 10 years away. The other thing to think about is if people do not have access to energy in the situation that we're in with the pandemic, think of what that means in terms of healthcare. Think of what that means in terms of education. So to help us, unpack some of the topics here today, we have 3 panelists who will be talking to you about sustainable energy and where we are in Africa. Our first panelist is Damilola Ogunbiyi. Damilola Ogunbiyi is the CEO of Sustainable Energy for All. She's the special representative of the UN Secretary General for Sustainable Energy for All and co-chair of UN Energy. She's also a commissioner for the Global Commission to End Energy Poverty. Before taking on this role, Ms. Ogunbiyi was the managing director of Nigerian Rural Electrification Agency and the general manager of the Lagos State Electricity Board. Our second panelist is David Lupe. David is the co-founder of New Home South Africa. David joined Nouveau Energy, the parent company of New Home, in 2019. And towards the end of 2019, David and a few members of the team from Nouveau Energy started up New Homes. And they actually just launched their operations in June 2020. They started rolling out in Gauteng, South Africa. So you'll be hearing a lot about that from him this afternoon. Prior to that, David was at Motor and Geo Construction South Africa, one of the largest construction companies in South Africa. Our third panelist is Habib Alebiosu. Habib is the co-founder and CEO of Viathan. He's also the founding partner at Vista Advisory Partners, a full-service corporate finance advisory firm. Prior to that, he was a director at Petra Trust, Ghana's largest pension fund administrator between 2011 and 2014. So these panelists that we have today will be talking to us about the landscape in Africa in terms of sustainable energy. And with David and Habib, you get to hear what sustainable energy looks like in 2 of the largest economies in Africa. With that, we will start with an introduction of what the respective organizations are doing in relation to sustainable energy. So we'll start with Damilola Ogunbiyi. Thank you.
So first, I'd like to say thank you for having me here today. Like it was said, my name is Damilola Ogunbiyi, and I'm the CEO and Special Rep for the Secretary General. I'm also the co-chair of UN Energy, which is really a really important tool in terms of actually focusing on sustainable energy for the most vulnerable people. For me, sustainable energy means gender equality and economic growth, better healthcare, education, sustainable cooling, food security. It all kind of underpins. And if you think of SDG 7, which is access to affordable, reliable, sustainable, and modern energy, that is really the SDG that underpins all the other SDGs. So if you do not achieve SDG 7, it's very hard that you would achieve any of the other SDGs. The vision is critical to unleash Africa's potential. The benefits of investing in sustainable energy across Africa are clear, especially now that we are at a point where we can really recover better. So we can clearly see that investing in cleaner energy provides 3 times more jobs than in the fossil equivalent. We can see how connected we are now with the COVID-19 pandemic in terms of the fact that without a functioning healthcare system, which is underpinned by energy, there's no equipment you have to come by, which is not going to be attached to some type of energy source. It's important. And I guess finally, just the data that we need to really move forward. I think as the moderator said, there are actually 565 million people that don't have access to energy. And between Ethiopia, Congo, and Nigeria make up half of that problem. So it's also really important to understand the countries that are involved and how they link. So basically what I've been focusing on is really help governments and economies reset, but reset in a cleaner way and make sure energy is at the top of the agenda for African governments and also governments in Southeast Asia. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Damilola. So now we'll move to David from New Home.
Good evening, everyone. As the intro was mentioned, I'm David Lupe. I am the co-founder and the director at New Home. New Home is a brand new venture from Nouveau Energy. Nuvo Energy, the parent company, is a very fast-growing renewable energy company here in South Africa that is mainly focused on solar PV, but we have access to other technologies such as biomass and mini hydro. A new home for us is the avenue by which we feel we can bridge the gap between, what we're seeing as, South Africa having only 8.8% of its total energy generation coming from renewables. We see New Home as an opportunity to put renewable energy in every person's home here in South Africa. And so our goal is, to make renewable energy affordable and accessible to, over, 30 million South Africans in the target market that we're looking at. And we feel that is a market that has, been underserviced in the past. And, most solar companies have focused on large-scale IPP projects, and more recently, commercial and industrial solar. But where we are now with renewable energy technology becoming a lot more cost-effective, and with storage becoming a lot better, this is becoming something that's accessible to every home at a price that is competitive to what the utilities are offering. So, as Damilola was speaking about energy access globally, New Home and Nuvo Energy in general is looking at, powering our Africa and what that means for enabling the economies to grow, and also looking at how Africa can leapfrog the West in the sense of, we've moved from, landline phones to mobile telecoms, and renewable energy is also an opportunity for us to move, from fossil fuels and to jump straight into having most of our energy come from renewables. So that's it from New Home and what we're kind of looking at.
Thanks, David. And Habib, over to you. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Once again, thanks for inviting us to participate in this session. I'm quite familiar with Mrs. Ogunbi. She pretty much laid the foundation for a lot of the good work we're doing here in Nigeria. So again, I'm Habib Ali Bioshu. I'm Group CEO of Viatan. Viatan effectively is an integrated energy solutions company headquartered in Lagos. Our footprint is very quickly growing. We have a combined installed capacity of roughly 50 megawatts, mostly through gas-fired engines. So the emphasis for us is on clean fuels. With a clear plan to transition to green at some point. Included in our fleet, or should I say in our service bouquet, is also a virtual gas supply infrastructure, and our ability to meet our customers' demands. We're actively working as an institution to pretty much change the African narrative as it relates to sustainable energy. As most people would know, with respect to Nigeria particularly, we have roughly just about 49% electricity access rate that can improve significantly, and particularly if the target is to effectively to have 100% penetration in terms of electricity access by 2030. So it's a lot of work that needs to be done. Our business model is pretty much straightforward. We pretty much take control of the entire value chain from generation to distribution, keep a good solid hold on the gas supply facilities, and ensure that the customers or our clients get power. Critical, or should I say the primary focus for now has been the commercial, industrial, and wholesale residential. Gradually, we expect to make the necessary or requisite impact. We're gradually shifting and supporting various, should I say, SME electricity access initiatives. Mrs. Ogumbi, during her time at the REA, conceptualized the Energizing Economies Initiative, under which Viaton was able to supply electricity to about 1,047 SMEs in a place called Sura Market in Lagos. So we're extremely excited about what's to come in this long and steep journey towards meeting the SDG 7 goals. So that's it for Viaton.
Thank you very much, Habib. Thank you all for the introduction about what you do. And I already like the fact that you told us about your connection with Ms. Ogumbi, at least from her previous job. So Damilola, maybe just to start with you, you touched a bit about this, about your engagement with different governments. Would like to just hear from you about how the sustainable energy agenda is shaping energy policy on the continent. Give us some insight into what is going on around the continent. Thank you.
I mean, to be honest, most countries on the continent already had some type of policy as it relates to energy. What countries tend to lack is how it relates to decentralized energy, because the focus has always been on big grid connected programs. So basically, like what Habib is doing, having a road in for IPPs, mini grids, solar home systems, have been policies that they're working on now. I'm really proud to say that in Nigeria, there is a mini grid policy, and that's why there's a World Bank program to support it. So it's not kind of starting from scratch anymore. It's trying to do kind of like South Africa to Africa learning to say, look, if this policy really, really works well in Senegal, why don't you adopt it in Congo, right? With editing it to suit that environment, instead of what typically happens is you spend the first couple of years just paying consultants a lot of money to tell you what you already know. So I'm not worried in terms of energy policy. I'm kind of more not saying worried. My focus is more in terms of having programs to drive total access. And what I mean is that we've got 565 million people and want to achieve this goal by 2030. There's now a key pandemic, which is COVID, right? And a lot of governments are focusing their money on what is needed the most, and it's trying to drive government to think, energy should be one of the main criteria. First, in terms of GDP growth, the first, for every $1 you spend, you get back an additional GDP 0.93 cents. For every 1,000 households you connect, you create 25 jobs. So it's more like showing them what is the benefits of going towards cleaner energy. And I'm one of the products of where policy actually followed after projects. It doesn't really mean you always have everything in place before you can really drive it. So that's what's exciting, because governments are now saying, okay, fine, how do we do this, and how do we do it cleaner? So obviously that is my role, and then obviously my role is also holding up the DFIs and the other global institutions to make sure things like technical assistance and funding can actually be made available for governments to utilize. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Damilola. You touched on a few things, and that's why we wanted to also hear from two players and two different countries on the continent. So I'll just pass it to David to just give us, in like a minute, the context in South Africa in terms of access to energy, broadly speaking, and the renewable energy space in South Africa.
I think it's definitely an interesting time for the renewable energy sector in South Africa. I think even in the latest integrated resource plan that was issued by the Department of Energy last year, there is a very strong focus on cleaner energy. So you've got a lot more gas, you've got a lot more wind and solar that is planned for in the transition. However, I still feel like a lot of the growth in the renewable energy sector is going to come from captive power, which is what I believe Habib and Viaton have been taking advantage of, which is a great opportunity to accelerate the uptake of energy in the market. So, over the last couple of years, we've seen, especially in the solar industry, the prices of panels, the prices of battery storage come down. And I mentioned battery storage specifically because we've got, we're getting to the point now where the cost of batteries is coming down in a similar way to how solar panels were coming down. And I believe that storage is one of the key enablers that will unlock the renewable opportunities, not just in South Africa, but across the continent. Because until now, renewable energy, and I'm speaking specifically about solar because interestingly enough, it seems to have been the choice for renewable or sustainable energy in South Africa, whereas for other countries, it might make more sense to use geothermal or to use gas if that is the resource that you have and that you have access to, hydropower, etc. And so in South Africa, I can say we've chosen solar as our sustainable energy of preferred choice. And it's always been something for the daytime and something that's not really, that's really, I don't know how I can put this, that has made grid stability difficult. So, there's almost a limit to how much you can put into the grid from renewables, and particularly solar. So you're seeing that storage now will unlock more opportunities. The utility here in South Africa, Eskom, has recently been putting out bids for battery storage. And that's an attempt to say, well, how can we utilize more renewable energy? How can we use that energy better at different times of the day to reduce load shedding and other energy supply issues that we're starting to have? But really, all I can say is I think the last couple of years that I've been in the industry, I've really seen more of an uptake from both users, whether they be residential or commercial, and also, interestingly enough, from financiers who've seen the opportunity and have jumped in to sort of make it affordable and accessible for more businesses and more homeowners. So that's what we're seeing here in South Africa.
Yeah, thanks, David. And I'll just quickly pass it to Habib. I know that David already mentioned gas and captive power. So if you just quickly tell us about what you're doing with that in Nigeria before I hand over to Damilola. I know that Damilola has to leave in a few minutes. So if you could please quickly say that, and then we'll segue to Damilola before she leaves. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Damilola. So in terms of what we're doing, effectively, we get productive clusters, as I mentioned. Our target market is, or should I say our key focus is to target high energy density areas and consumers who use the power for productive purposes, and then sort of diversify that base a bit with the wholesale residentials. And effectively, to date, we have about 5 power plants, predominantly supplying electricity to commercials and should I say water utilities for the most part in Lagos. And then we pretty much do so by locating our power plants under some sort of distributed generation paradigm. And what we do in doing so, we effectively have our own distribution network as well, which to date is roughly around 160 kilometers that we manage between Lagos and Ogun State. And we pretty much extend it to the different consumers that we have. In some cases, you find that there's a need to sort of back up or build some additional infrastructure to reinforce the gas supply at our different plants. And we pretty much do so ourselves through one of our other subsidiaries. And by and large, we maintain up to about 90 to 95% guaranteed availability for most of the consumers that we supply. It's a very interesting time in the country. Again, should I say there's still a huge supply deficit, and there are all sorts of models that we're developing that would pretty much see us over the coming years collaborating to a large extent with the distribution companies to pretty much grow our, should I say, our entire supply capability.
Thank you very much, Habib. Thank you for that. And we're going to go a bit into that with you and David once Damilola leaves. So Damilola, just a quick question from you, from someone in the audience is, so what happens beyond 2030 for the UN and sustainable energy for all, especially as it seems almost inevitable that the African countries will be able to meet the target of sustainable access to sustainable energy by 2030? Thank you.
I find that a very defeatist attitude by saying, obviously, people are not going to make it. I mean, I wouldn't have left a role in Nigeria if I really didn't think it was possible. I think we're going to try our best, and we're just going to continue. What people have to realize is that we could also go backwards if we're not careful, especially with population growth. So it's really important that we keep on at it. And we hold people accountable, both companies, global institutions, and also DFIs. But right now with COVID, I think it's showing that we're all connected. And if something isn't done in a very drastic way, and we don't embrace new challenges and new commitments and new sources of financing, right? This is a sector that only maybe at most a few $100 million goes to, and we need for Africa alone about 28 billion a year. So that just shows you the gap. If we don't do something drastic, things will look really bad. So I'm very, very optimistic that, never waste a good pandemic. I'm making sure that this is now, top of the agenda, and make sure people have access, not just to electricity, but also clean cooking. Because clean cooking relates to a lot of the gender-based violence we're seeing now. And I don't think people sometimes make that connection of, you're like 1 in 7 chance of getting raped when you're going to get fuelwood. 1 in 4 chance of getting beaten by your own husband if food isn't ready on time. These are statistics that really, really matter and affects women and children, of which obviously I'm very passionate about.
So I appreciate the optimism. And if you could just tell us 2 things that are happening that are keeping you optimistic, 2 initiatives or 2 sort of policy changes that you've seen that, what, it looks daunting, but we know that we're going to get there because these 2 things are happening right now.
Well, I feel for the first time, Africans are also leading in the conversation. I don't think if five years ago, you would have seen a Black African woman being the head of a UN agency, Sustainable Energy for All. I don't think you would have seen at the same time as a Deputy Secretary General. So I do think that, we are leading a lot of the conversations, but we also can't just. So, and I also think African governments are seeing that they also have to do things for themselves. And Africa has to learn from Africa instead of relying so much from the West. And then finally, I think a lot more money, at least going into 2021 is going to come in, just as it relates to cold change, right? So everyone's talking about a vaccine, but a vaccine is meant to be at -90 right now. The amount of energy you need to house that vaccine, to get it to where it's needed, to get it to the most vulnerable people, they have to have electricity at these centers where they are. So I think people are really thinking about the health of their people, as it relates to energy and clean cooking and electrification, and I think the public is also demanding it. So I think that combination is very, very powerful, and I think students and young people are really at the heart of it, to make sure this conversation isn't lost. At this time, we do not lose this momentum.
Damilola, she's dropped a few things for us to think about as we carry on this discussion. And I'll just perhaps ask Habib and David to briefly respond before we then switch over to the live Q&A session. Particularly in terms of, the fact that, we have 2030 ahead of us, and you're both doing, two different things. What do you see, where do you see the areas where you can make quick wins, given the business that you're operating towards the 2030 target? Maybe let's start with Habib this time around. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Miola. Generally, I mean, what we see, the trend in Nigeria is effectively that there's a lot of stranded capacity in the country. We think that in terms of the quick wins, the policy thrust should be directed at figuring out ways of enabling that, or figuring out the most optimal way of, should I say, facilitating access to the stranded capacity. Today in Nigeria, we have roughly about 8,000 megawatts that can be generated on grid, given the transmission network capacity, as well as about another 5,000 megawatts that can, 3,000 to 5,000 that can be distributed, given the distribution capacity, and a maximum of about 4,000 megawatts in generation. So therein lies potentially about 2,000 to 3,000 megawatt of capacity that can actually come on grid and pretty much increase that access to electricity rate. So some of the limitations so far have been issues around gas consumption, issues around finding the right technology and the right project sponsors to collaborate with the distribution companies, with firms like, with companies like Viatan. We already have such capability by virtue of the the significant access to capital that we have. We're able to pretty much help, move the needle. So to that extent, I would say stranded capacity needs to be addressed before sort of thinking through how to generate additional capacity.
Thank you very much, Habib. So David, what do you think, a couple of things that can quickly be done in South Africa towards attaining the 2030 target from a South African point of view?
Yeah, so from a South African point of view, I'll quickly talk about gas. We're not as yet heavily involved in the gas industry, although I have been involved in a couple of gas to power projects that are looking to come online in the next couple of years. And what is becoming clear is that, South Africa has a generation capacity of about 55 gigawatts, so 55,000 megawatts. And over 90% of that comes from coal. So, the other 8% is made up of, wind, solar, etc. And so for wind and solar to kind of ramp up to, say 20% or 30%, that's going to, I think, be too much of a task. But if you look at gas as an alternative to coal for baseload, that starts to look more sustainable and starts to look more plausible. Because the challenges obviously that you have with solar is daytime use, and the challenges that you have with wind is grid stability. So there is talk about a 6,000 megawatt gas to power program for South Africa. And I believe that's one of the avenues that can be used to quickly ramp up the sustainability and the clean energy side of South African generation, which has predominantly been reliant on coal. And the benefits are quite clear. As Habib would know, LNG or gas fired plants actually generate about half the amount of CO2 that a coal-fired power station has. But I'd say in South Africa we have kind of a different challenge, where in Nigeria Habib was talking about transmission and distribution. Here in South Africa we actually have a quite a solid distribution network, with 91% of South Africans having access to power. But then the issue is generation, and how quickly that can be brought online. And I think one of the answers is to actually have homes and businesses start to generate their own captive power. And the challenge that we have here in South Africa is mainly the legislation and the limitations that it's put on captive power. So, to generate more than 1 megawatt at a business or on a home, you need a generation license, and it's a lot of bureaucracy and red tape to actually get a generation license. Now, it was announced last year that limit was going to be moved to 10 megawatts you can generate without a license, but we haven't as yet seen that being gazetted. So those are some of the challenges that I feel are kind of slowing down the take up of renewables in South Africa, and that's going to be related to wheeling agreements. So I think one of the biggest and quickest wins that we could take advantage of here in South Africa is if we were to ease the process of getting licenses to wheel power from one part of the country to another, because depending on where the optimal location is to generate power, it might be optimal to produce power at one point, but the need may be another part of the grid or another part of the country. So those are just some of the issues that I'm seeing here. So in summary, for us here, it's about legislation, which is hindering generation actually to come online.
Thank you very much, David. I think Habib would probably like to take some of the transmission infrastructure that you have in South Africa and maybe give you gas from Nigeria, since we seem to be at opposite ends of the challenge spectrum. Okay, so now we're going to go into the live Q&A with questions from our attendees. You heard voices of people who were attending the webinar earlier on in terms of definition of sustainable energy. So we're going to bring them back in to ask live questions live in the course of the webinar. And that Q&A session will be moderated by Adeze Okore, one of our DOWA fellows, and she's also a public health fellow at Cornell University. Over to you, Adeze. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emiola, and thank you again to our panelists, David, Habib, and Damilola, who unfortunately is no longer with us for this live Q&A. But as we're now transitioning, I want to encourage the attendees of this webinar to take the next minute or so to look through the questions that you can see in our Q&A window. Type in and submit your questions, upvote the ones that you would like me to ask our panelists, and then we will dive right into the live Q&A. Thank you. So as these submissions are coming in, the first one that I want to ask is, what are the exact policy shifts that governments have to make to enable sustainable energy in Africa? And I think I'll direct this question to David, as you've talked about the bureaucracy constraints that South Africa faces in terms of generating energy.
Look, I'll speak from a context of South Africa, because that's kind of the market that I'm more familiar with. But I've looked at a couple of projects in the rest of Africa. I've looked at projects in Nigeria. I've looked at projects in Ghana. I've looked at projects in Sierra Leone. And one of the common factors, at least on the rest of the continent, seems to be, I guess, the privatization of our transmission and distribution infrastructure. I know that can be a difficult topic, especially in West Africa. I know Nigeria has gone through a process. I know Ghana has gone through a process. But in my mind, I just feel like if you were able to have profitable and well-run transmission and distribution companies, that would greatly enable the generators to be able to come online and to be able to connect and to be able to get energy to the users who need it most. So how we do that successfully, I haven't seen anyone do that very well, but I'm kind of more for the private sector in terms of just having a competitive and having a profitable approach to running these infrastructures. That's kind of just my personal view. So here in South Africa, we've got just one utility. They control generation, transmission, and distribution. And so, there's a small gap for generators to kind of come online. But what about the rest of the network and the infrastructure? Could that be run by the private sector? I don't know. But those are some of the common challenges that I see with both South Africa and the rest of the continent. And so, if you ask me specifically about policies, I would say, sort of deregulating those sectors and allowing people to be able to the market to be able to determine where power should go and when and how.
Thank you, David. And Habib, if there's anything you would like to add in terms of your perspective from working in Nigeria or West Africa in general, please feel free.
Okay, sure. I mean, I would echo most of the same sentiments as David. The only thing I would suggest is more of a partial deregulation as against a food deregulation. In the Nigerian context, the reality is that we have an abundance of policies, but they're not working as they should, and that may be due to a myriad of issues, down from implementation to perhaps inadequate understanding of the real problem. So most of the issues that we have here are around call it availability and access to the electricity. So in other words, most commercial, industrial, and also residential pretty much enjoy at best 8 to 10 hours of electricity supply on a daily basis. We think that can be 24 hours, and we do think that there are several other, service providers such as Viatan that can actually, drive that increased access. But the precise policy shift that I think will address that will be some sort of framework that allows, these communities or these clusters pretty much drive the onboarding of the preferred solution for stable electricity supply. So what you currently have are mostly, regulations or policies around that pretty much still rely on the distribution companies to drive that increased availability. So a bit of a shift more towards a consumer-focused regulatory framework would significantly move the needle in that respect. So to that extent, partial deregulation would attract producers such as Viatan, or will afford us the opportunity to pretty much target those type of customer concentrations in a way that allows us meet their power needs under a willing buyer, willing seller type of framework.
Thank you, Habib. And so the next question that I want to pose to the both of you is, as we can all relate, being affected by the COVID-19 pandemic, and considering how sustainable energy, one of the goals is to reach as many people as possible and make that energy accessible to multiple people, multiple communities. So within this pandemic, could both of you, starting with Habib, talk about how this pandemic is affecting your plans for the future of sustainable energy?
So for us, it's blatantly affected most of the projects that we've conceived of. And most of these projects are high impact projects. For instance, we were a preferred bidder for one of the major distribution companies in the north central area of the country. That would have actually, I think roughly by Q3, Q4 this year, we ought to have been at a stage where we would have attained commercial operations date for a particular industrial settlement. The adverse effect of COVID meant that most of the development work has stalled since. We've experienced a huge demand of electricity, as most of the commercials that we supply electricity to have pretty much, they're pretty much running some sort of rationing programs, which means that the offices are not open for the same time periods, which effectively means that again, there's been a huge demand diminution, and that has affected revenue levels, which ultimately can affect our ability to finance the various new developments. So again, within the African context, a lot of the collaboration, a lot of the development work has effectively been stifled as a result of the pandemic. And to that extent, it means budget expectations are not being met. Fortunately, our cash flows have been resilient enough, so we've been able to meet most of our financial obligations, thankfully. But this is now starting to ease up. So end of H1 was much better, and hopefully before the year runs out, as normalcy is restored, the results should get better, and we should get right back on track with most of these projects.
Thank you, Habib. And David, take it away.
I think from our side, I'll speak about the two different entities that we have. Looking at Nouveau Energy, which is the energy group, they were more focused on design, engineering, and installation of renewable energy projects, mainly solar PV. And that's mainly been focused on commercial and industrial. And unlike Viathan, very few of our projects are actually financed. So the bulk of them have been paid for by the client, who sees the benefit of cleaner and frankly more affordable energy. And so what we saw is a lot of projects being pushed back to 2021. And we saw some projects being cancelled. But interestingly, in the last, I'd say, month or so, we've seen people say, look, we want to do this project. We want to be green. We want to save money for our businesses. Can you provide us with a finance solution? So obviously businesses are facing cash flow challenges, and they've got other CapEx projects to prioritize. So now we're seeing a big uptake in requests for finance. And fortunately, we have another part of the business that does that. And the other impact that we've sort of had is, with people working from home a lot more, then they're home a lot more, they're using a lot more energy at home. And so load shedding has started to have a real impact. So here in South Africa, we've had the different levels, level 1 going up to level 6, which reflects the amount of capacity that has dropped off from the grid due to, maintenance issues or breakdown with several power plants. Now, if you are at work for, 8 to 10 hours of the day, if it happens during the day, or if it happens while you're asleep, it doesn't impact you as much. But now if you're home 24/7 and you're working from home and there's load shedding, then you'll definitely be feeling the pinch. So New Home as our vehicle to address the renewable energy opportunity in the residential market, that has actually started to gain a lot more traction due to the pandemic. And we kind of see that as something that's going to be interesting going forward, given that people are going to be looking for energy security at home, whether they're working from home or whether they're spending more time at home. That actually becomes a interesting target market for us to look at, which for a lot of reasons has been difficult to access, and I think that has pushed a lot of our competitors away from kind of looking at residential. But we see residential as the opportunity going forward.
Thank you. And now the next question that I'm seeing here comes from Raymond, and he's asking, is natural gas the ideal fuel for sustainably industrializing Africa? And we understand that it's been discussed in this panel that Africa is not a monolith. There are many countries within the continent, and they have different needs and therefore different solutions. So please feel free to give your take as to the appropriateness of natural gas in South Africa for you, David, and then in Nigeria for you, Habib.
All right. I mean, for us, I mean, for Nigeria and even beyond, even for Africa as a continent, I mean, Nigeria has an abundance of natural gas, north of 2 trillion SCF in terms of reserves, and from the numbers that I've looked at, north of 200 years in terms of how long it would take before we are able to diminish that resource. So it makes sense, not only because it's cleaner than coal. David mentioned that 90% of South Africa's energy mix is predominantly on coal. We think that, it makes sense to sort of shift from coal to cleaner sources. Within the context of industrialization, we think that Africa needs to take a good look into what its most optimal integrated energy resource plan looks like. And to that extent, we should be looking for resources and solutions that are cheaper for us, that pretty much balance out or that improves the balance of trade for the continent as a whole. And to that extent, we think gas will play a major role. The critical issues around, or should I say that the challenges around increasing the offtake for gas is more often than not issues around the infrastructure, which should be the focus of most governments, figuring out ways of making or financing this infrastructure that facilitates access to this should I say very crucial resource. So far in Nigeria, roughly, there's still a lot of gas flaring activity. That's changing significantly. There are all sorts of new solutions around even making gas even much cleaner than it is today. There's sort of, should I say, close to zero gas emission type solutions or technologies that can help the narrative. Besides the fact that as I mentioned, it's cheaper, it's cleaner, it's overall long-term levelized cost of energy from gas fired solutions is better than when compared to coal, when compared to other fossil fuels, and even when compared to some renewables today. So as much as I think gas has a huge role to play for the African industrialization context, it will equally complement other solutions. So renewables do have a place. In Nigeria, we probably have less than 1% representation of renewables in the entire energy mix. So I'd like to see that increase. I'm told that the target is roughly around to increase that to roughly 10% by 2030. We'll see how that goes. But yeah, for now, we think that gas has to be a major part of that story, and will provide is a stable enough and cheap enough resource.
Thank you, Habib.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, I think the short answer is yes. And so I'd agree with Habib that there are plenty of countries on the continent with access to significant amounts of gas. And, going back to the introduction, which asked, what is sustainable energy for Africa, right? You have, over 50 countries on the continent, and each of them have different resources. I can understand why coal has predominantly been used in South Africa because there's a lot of coal. And then you get countries like Kenya, where they've got over 50% of their generation coming from hydro because they can do that. DRC also has quite a bit of access to hydro. Then, you've got Ghana, you've got Nigeria and Mozambique now with significant access to gas. And so if you just look at the map of Africa and where the gas and oil reserves are, you get the sense that, there's at least half of the continent with significant access to gas. If you count the countries, you've got Angola, you've got South Africa with reserves on the west coast. You've got Mozambique, you've got Kenya, you've got the countries going further up north, South Sudan, and then you've got countries on the west coast of Africa that have access to gas. And so it's really about taking advantage of those reserves. And building out the infrastructure. So I think there is a massive opportunity for Africa to use gas as a cleaner technology. Although, gas does come with its own challenges in terms of storage, in terms of building out the power plants, and also the exploration and how that gas comes online. But I think gas is definitely an alternative to coal. I think renewables can only do so much because you have base load that needs to be supplied, both at night and even during the day, a consistent amount of power coming through the grid. And that's something that, wind and solar can't necessarily do. So, I definitely think gas is a viable alternative.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Habib. The next question comes from Victor, and it reads, would you say the regulatory environment is currently an enabler or hindrance to private sector involvement in the sector of renewable energy?
Well, I'll try to be as politically correct as I can be in answering the question as much as it is important to answer it. There definitely needs to be a shift in the mindset of regulators. I think in Africa, it's not well understood enough in terms of in terms of having that clear perspective on the point of regulation. At the end of the day, it's all about consumer protection, by and large. It's all about ensuring consumers are free. It's all about having that or ensuring that there is increased access to electricity. And to the extent that we're not getting that result under the current, or should I say the evolving framework, then we certainly need to have a conversation around what the regulatory environment looks like. So to that point, I would say the regulatory environment or the regulators can do a much better job in facilitating private sector involvement in the sector. Again, there have been several policies in Nigeria over the last decade on several roadshows that have been. Nigeria has been lauded as one of the new frontiers when it comes to most of our policies around mini grids and all whatnot. But the real challenge has been, to what extent have we moved the needle? And the answer is not a great deal, and we can do much better. Our pension assets in the country is in the 10 to 11 trillion naira range, and I think what That's about $100 billion, if I'm correct, if my math is correct, and just about 2 trillion of, less than 2 trillion of that is invested in infrastructure. If my estimates are correct as well. So, in other words, there's significant room and appetite to facilitate access to, should I say, longer tenured instruments, and that would pretty much be or represent a good platform for private sector involvement in the power sector. Viaton, for one, has access to significant capital to get more involved, to solve most of the last mile problems around power access. I'm not saying generation is not a problem in Nigeria. It is, but we just don't think that's the problem as of now, given that we have about 13,000 megawatts of generation capacity. But in terms of the last mile infrastructure, it's missing. And we think that most of the policies, albeit well-intentioned towards facilitating access to electricity, have not paid dividends. And that's because, we think regulators can be more consumer-centric in how they're thinking about regulating the sector. So yes, regulation has not been as effective as it should be.
Thank you, Habib. And David, please, if you may, weigh in on this question.
Now, I'm going to be less politically correct, right? Regulation has absolutely hindered involvement of private sector here in South Africa, and I think I spoke to it earlier about looking at captive power. If you look at some of the large energy users in the country, you had Sasol, the biggest oil and gas company in South Africa, issue out an RFP for 600 megawatts of capacity, and you've got mines and other production facilities that use megawatts and gigawatts of power a year. And yet, for me as a private sector player, unless I apply for a generation license that is going to take me maybe 12 months to 2 years, I cannot supply anything more than 1 megawatt without a license. And for me, that's one of the most stifling regulatory issues. And then the second one that I think I mentioned was the transmission and distribution regulation. And I'm talking specifically about wheeling, sending power from one part of the country to another. So I have access to, let's say, call it 900 hectares of land in a desert part of the country where the sun is always shining, and I need to get it to the coastal area of the country for a large mining company. It's still very unclear about how I do that, because I'm supposed to apply to the utility, but to date there's only like a handful of players who've been able to get their hands on this license. No one knows how or why, and it's just really frustrating to think about the potential for the private sector to be involved. But I think I would just like to touch on other countries as well. So, if you look at the regulation in other countries, part of the issue is there is very little regulation in some of these other markets. And so while we have our own frustrations here in South Africa, it's I guess I don't know which one is worse, to not have supporting regulation, or for it to be quite opaque in terms of how do I even go about getting power online or getting a license, and who's responsible for transmission and distribution, and how do I price and get my contracts approved. There are some countries that I've dealt with and looked at where that's actually a real challenge. And this may not be a regulatory issue, but I'll touch on bankability. So creditworthiness of some of these countries has actually made it very difficult for private sector to get involved, because I have to supply power. This is, if I'm looking to be a utility and I'm looking to supply power onto the national grid, what is the ability of the counterparty country or the utility to actually pay for that power? So that's not necessarily a regulatory issue, but it is kind of adjacent to part of the problem.
Thank you, both of you, to your some politically correct, some not as politically correct, but still very thorough answers to these questions. And I guess as a wrap-up question, before we transition to the end of this webinar, if you guys could briefly tell us about the partnerships that you and your companies have been either forming or looking to form, either within the sustainable energy sector or across sectors during this COVID time, and how you've been looking to use those partnerships to bolster the work that you're doing. Thank you. And Habib, we can start with you.
All right, thank you. For us, collaboration and partnerships are a big part of what we do. That said, we absolutely can do a whole lot more in sort of like putting out material that solicits interest from different, should I say, contributors or different potential partners. A lot of the initiatives are geared towards, should I say, diversifying the current energy mix that we have. We have various concepts around solar, particularly for one of our plants. We see ways, we're looking at ways we can potentially reduce the cost of our backup solution, which today are sometimes CNG and CNG means compressed natural gas, or sometimes diesel. So we solar can play a big role in displacing diesel as the alternative fuel used for our backup solutions. We are active on that front. Beyond that, I know there's been, we were in South Africa sometime earlier in the year, seeking partnerships and looking at ways we can help with sort of, should I say, transitioning or rather displacing diesel as the primary source of fuel that's used for mass transportation in Nigeria. We're working and collaborating with Lamata, which is the Lagos State agency responsible for mass transit in the city. And what we're trying to do here is, should I say, introduce CNG buses, or better yet, convert the current fleet of diesel-fired buses to compressed natural gas-fired buses for transportation purposes. I mean, the benefits are obvious. It's cheaper. It's cleaner. We've put out we've put out the word, and as I mentioned, we can do a whole lot more in soliciting the right interest and partnership when it comes to that. The natural one that we live and breathe on a daily basis is our outreach to the distribution companies and to communities or productive clusters that require electricity. We think that the development paradigm should be one that's more collaborative and that understands the use of the power solution. We need to understand their ability to pay, to be able to design and configure the right products and solutions. So in terms of the ecosystem of support and collaboration, it goes from OEMs to development partners, to DFIs, to donor agencies, to young people. Metering is an area that we're quite keen on. Metering in Nigeria is abysmal. We think that a better metering architecture for our independent electricity distribution networks would do us a whole lot of good. Metering can be a useful tool for managing our entire network as some form of, call it, partial SCADA in a way. So again, I think there needs to be a lot more youth involvement in the sector. In the area of It's one area that we also in recent times have opened up the channels for different people to collaborate with us, particularly because we see the market evolving in a way where clusters of consumers can come together and declare a need for their own independent power source. And if that's going to happen, proper studies will need to be done so that we can have the appropriate design and which would effectively birth the appropriate solution for serving these communities or these clusters. Across the ecosystem, we seek collaboration, we seek partnership, but like I mentioned, we can do a whole lot more in terms of our outreach to everyone and anyone who's able to help.
Thank you, Habib. And David?
I think we've looked at partnerships from two different angles. One is partnerships locally and partnerships on an international scale. So for us locally, what we've done is it's interesting how Habib's strategy is quite similar to ours in the sense that we are trying to expand our product offering beyond solar PV. And so we've actually aligned ourselves with a mini hydro engineering company, as well as a biogas electricity generation engineering company. And so those are the partnerships that we've looked at forming internally to say, well, you might have a client that is operating 24 hours a day. They're happy to use solar during the day, but what do they use at night? Or some operations use a significant amount of water, and how do you actually generate more energy from that water that is going to flow from one part of the operation to another part of the operation? And so being able to offer a holistic solution to the client instead of sort of pushing down one technology in their direction. The other partnerships we've been looking at is funding partnerships. And on that, we've been looking internationally to some extent. And we've been looking at bringing in capital or cheap capital, if there is such a thing, but bringing in a lower cost of capital from predominantly Europe, where you've got very low interest rates, and bringing that into Africa. So I think one of the great opportunities that I see is, you've got all this foreign investment that is looking for somewhere to go. So, I mean, since, I can relate to some of the attendees because I studied and lived in Australia for about 10, 11 years. And I saw the opportunity to move back to Africa and take advantage of the infrastructure gap, right? So, as a finance professional, I see that there's about a 90 to 100 million, $100 billion infrastructure gap that Africa needs to close every year to catch up on issues like access to water, access to electricity, housing, education, etc., or whatever you want to call it. So energy is just one of the sectors that we've chosen to target. It's what I've focused on for the last couple of years. And you can see that there's a lot of foreign companies, especially from Europe, that have set up in South Africa in the last couple of years, because everyone has seen that there's less opportunity in the developed economies, and there's more opportunities in emerging markets, and particularly in Africa. And so what we've tried to do is form relationships with a couple of international funders to say, how do we start to bring some of that capital into the continent, and sort of close and do our little part in closing that infrastructure funding gap. And so that's kind of how we've looked at our international partnerships.
Thank you both, David and Habib, so much for your answers. And unfortunately, we don't have time to continue. Thank you again to the attendees for the questions that you submitted. And with that, I'll now transition to DOWA's co-founder and CEO, Ola, for the wrap-up. Thank you.
Thank you, Adeze. I'll start off by saying I am DOWA, and hopefully at the end of this webinar, you all will be saying I am DOWA too. But come along with me for 2 minutes. Imagine an Africa where there's collaboration of the greatest minds, effective doers with access to resources in all sectors or industries, agriculture, energy, finance. What do you envision? That is why I have a huge smile on my face, and hopefully you're smiling too. But let's come back to now. We know we all face a mirage of challenges in Africa, and I won't start by listing them now. I'm sure you can come up with a laundry list of different issues. When I decided to embark on my return to Africa journey, there were a few things that I was grateful for. One was boots on the ground in reference to my business partner, which happens to be my mom. I relied on her for established relationships, knowledge of the terrain, acceleration on due process and due diligence, understanding context, and access to resources to be effective in getting things done through workarounds and knowing the right people or person. It really defined for me the term your net worth. Your network is your net worth. Imagine if we all have that opportunity to have access to all those types of resources filled with the passion that we all have for Africa, how that would help accelerate collaboration and exponential development of Africa. We at DOWA believe that all those challenges you thought about a moment ago that Africa has presents opportunities for us to build a community, a culture of collaborators, connecting those with skills to those working to address existing challenges on how they can effectively work towards meeting sustainable development goals and contribute positively to the global challenges we face today. Some of you might ask how. While we welcome people coming to Africa, experiencing the beauty and the benefits of the continent, we at DOWA believe that it would be extremely beneficial to have the change agents and advocates amongst us effect exponential change by sharing our knowledge and skills with the continent, especially the young ones. I believe that they are the missing piece of the puzzle. Their yearn, their drive, their empathy, compassion, and zeal are infectious and inspiring. We had over 400 students apply for the DOWA Summer Pilot Internship Program, which shows the potential of this program. We selected 10 students who interned with organizations doing good, scalable, impactful work across 7 African countries. The work, the ideas, strategies that our intern have been able to effect in our current partner organizations were positive and exponential over the course of the summer. It opened our eyes and it opens our partners' eyes to the possibilities. There's a saying that goes, the children are our future. Lead them in the right way. These young ones are our future. Together, let's grow a network of collaborators and create a culture and community of collaborating on scalable, impactful work in Africa. With every interaction, offer value. It is then that we can drive out darkness and shed light, scale up the amazing work happening in various parts of the continent, as we heard today from New Home and also from Vietnam. Sorry, I just missed my, I was going over the speech I'd prepared. But the other thing I wanted to actually also say is hope you're thinking now yourself that I am DOWA, doing good work in Africa by deciding to seek out how you can impact who you can collaborate with, share skills with, resources now, not later. You and I are the great minds. You and I are the effective doers. You and I have access to endless resources. You and I are DOWA. So with that said, are you an accomplished student, a professional entrepreneur in the diaspora looking to connect and give back to the continent? Are you an organization doing good work, good grassroots, scalable, and impactful work on the continent? There's an opportunity to effect change, to collaborate together. Please find ways to work, collaborate with stakeholders in the development of Africa through DOWA and other organizations like DOWA. You can visit our website to see ways you can collaborate with us or collaborate with our current partners. You can reach out to us to see what other partners we're in the process of collaborating with. Lastly, please take a minute after this to answer some of the questions that might pop up in the poll that will give us better direction in how we should move this program along and what changes we need to make. The last thing I want to do is thank everyone. I want to start by thanking our panelist, Mrs. Ogun B. from Sustainable Energy for All. I want to thank David Lupe from New Home, Africa, representing South Africa. I would like to also thank Mr.
Habib Alebiosun of Vietnam Engineering, representing Nigeria.
Thank you all so much for honoring us and coming on and sharing your knowledge and the good work, the impactful work that you're doing on the continent. I would like to also thank all the fellows. So we have 4 fellows working with us from the inception of DOWA, from Cornell University and the organization called Scholars in Our Society in Africa. Their names are Adeze Okere was our moderator, Akachuku Uba, Chinasa Okolo, and Linda Ninduhu. Thank you for all the hard work. I want to especially thank our interns for all the time the tireless work that they've done with all the organizations that they've worked with over the summer, the great work that they did with them and the changes they were able to effect. I would particularly want to touch on the students that even went as far as finding ways of having all the organizations that were in the program find ways to collaborate and find mutual benefits for across the board. I also want to thank especially our DOWA interns, Iris Hun and
Ijoma Inukwe.
They were instrumental in putting this webinar together. I hope you saw all I'm not that tech savvy, so I hope you saw all the things that they did to be able to put together this webinar, and just for their tireless work and their yearn to want to give back and use all their skills. I also want to thank our partner organizations, FUNEMA, Girl Child Concerns, and Buy From Farms, for giving us the opportunity to actually collaborate and have students from the program work with them. Lastly, I want to thank the audience for taking the time out of the Saturday to come spend with us and share and ask questions. And I'll reach out and find ways to collaborate with us. Thank you, Emiola, for coming along on this journey. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much, Ola, and thank you, everyone. As Ola said, we're very grateful for taking the time out of your Saturday to join us in this webinar. I think just to wrap up, we've heard a lot of things from our speakers, and in as much as, we started off the conversation talking about 2030 is 10 years away and we're still so far behind, Damilola brought us the optimism of the work that she's doing and what Sustainable Energy for All is trying to achieve in Africa. And you can hear from what David and Habib said that gas is something we can use, and we can start to use of all the other, scalable examples in the region. We can start to focus on that. We can use mini grids, and this is not something that is, peculiar to Nigeria or just South Africa. The opportunity is there, and broadly speaking, in terms of sustainable energy, as I started saying, we have the lack of access to any kind of energy. So the thing, just like David mentioned about leapfrogging, is we don't have to start by just creating access to energy that isn't sustainable. The challenge is to create access to energy for everyone that is actually sustainable energy. So I'll leave all of you with that challenge, and with the hope that, if we do use some of these options that are available to us, 10 years from now, we'll be talking about everybody having access to energy. Hopefully the pandemic would let us get to that date. And I think, just as Tinuke said, I just want to leave you with a few things about, DOWA. We're trying to connect these students to organizations doing work in Africa. And the level of work that is required is a lot. And there's so many people doing so many different things. So we encourage you to please collaborate with us. We're saying, I am DOWA, and we hope that at some point we can all say we are DOWA. Thank you so much, Damilola, Habib, and David for joining as panelists. And we look forward to other sessions with you, or you can just please complete the poll. Thank you so much. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you for this opportunity. I think it's a great format for bringing people together and hopefully getting some of the students back after they're done with school, or they're looking at opportunities to come back to the continent. It's a journey that I had to go through, and I hope others are willing to join the journey as well, to just make our continent better.
Thanks, David and Habib. So, Iris, I guess we can close the poll now and end the webinar. We'll be reaching out to you on all our social media channels and getting back to you on this webinar. Thank you all very much. Have a good evening. Have a good day, depending on wherever you are in the world. Thank you.